Hi, friends, it's Walter Zemrock, and welcome to the Giving Gratitude Hop, where we're hopping along to say thank you to you, our followers, for all of your support and everything that you do. For this card, I decided to go for a fun vintage vibe using Unity stamp products. The theme of being grateful for a loved one in your life is what I focused on. I started by cutting out a scalloped edged card panel using the Unity Stamps scalloped edge die set. The panel size was 4 inches by 5.25 inches. I put some low-tack tape around the scalloped edges so that when I stamp, I didn't stamp directly on them. The Post-it tape is wonderful because it comes right off and doesn't leave any kind of residue when you're done. It doesn't have to be perfectly aligned, just enough to cover the edges so that it doesn't get any of the print on them. With the panel in place, I aligned my background text stamp and used some antique linen distress oxide ink to stamp it. I decided to go with the antique linen so that it was a nice, light, kind of tan color in the background that wouldn't take away from the other elements that I stamp onto the card. A couple of good presses and it was perfect. Next, I grabbed my tea dye distress ink and inked around the edges of the panel. And once I was done with the tea dye, I moved on and used some vintage photo going around and over the same area. This gives it just that really nice vintage look, lots of grunge and lots of dark edges. It's an aesthetic that I really enjoy. I did also add a little bit of antique linen into the center of the card panel, again, just to give it some vintage grunge. I then took an A2 craft card base and used the vintage photo ink around the edges of the front of the base. This will add the nice contrast to the panel when I put the panel onto it, and again, gives you that really nice vintage aesthetic. Running some scorched timber around the edges also enhances that and gives it that much older look, as well as almost like a burned type of look around the edges. And it's something that I really enjoy. And it just ages each of the pieces so well. I did the same thing on the card panel by running the ink pad over the scalloped edges. The stamp set that I'm using had a really great background stamp as well of all of these little hearts. So I used some Distress Oxide ink in a pinkish color and randomly stamped them around the panel. The color I used was Victorian Velvet, which is not quite pink, not quite purple, but really a nice in-between shade. And I then aligned and stamped my sentiment onto my card panel using the scorched timber. It's a nice dark color that isn't as dark as black, but is definitely on the darker brown shade. I like to stamp the sentiment a few times to make sure that it is nice and crisp. I could now add my couple onto the card panel. I positioned the stamp where I wanted it and stamped it a few times with some clear embossing ink. I then added some gold embossing powder onto the image. I really like the Brutus Monroe Gilded Gold Embossing Powder. In my opinion, it's really one of the best gold powders out there. Happy with the coverage, I went ahead and used my heat tool to heat set the image. I use a platform that allows me to put the image under it and protects my hand. Look how shiny that is. I just absolutely love it. I put some double-sided adhesive onto the back of the panel and put it down onto my card base. I eyeball it and center it, approximate. It doesn't have to be 100% perfect. I'm not someone who measures out and then adheres it down on those marks. I just eyeball it and put it down. I'm going to use some paper flowers from Prima Marketing as some embellishments. I find three that I really like and think work well both together as well as with this design. I use a brush to put some tea dye distress ink on to distress the flowers, and then glue them down onto my card. Once glued down, I put a dab of glue in the center of each flower and then adhere a gold acrylic bubble into the center of each of them. I then use some tweezers just to kind of lift the petals and form them into more of that natural flower shape so that they're not just stuck down onto my card panel. And with making those adjustments, my card is done. Thanks so much for following and supporting me, and also for hopping along with us today. Please read the information below to find out how you are eligible to win a prize.